Well, welcome everyone to our event, My Life, My Business. Wish I was here. And last week we had a wonderful conversation. Well, it was a weighty topic, and we were discussing suicide rates amongst males. And it was interesting where we landed up with that conversation. So, you can always listen to the playback on Clubhouse, or you can listen to the edited version on our YouTube channel, the Mufasa Coaching Practice. But without further ado, I also just want to especially welcome my co-host Shanaz, and it's always great to have these conversations with her as we explore just the various topics. And the aim, as I always remind you, is really about engaging with your life, being present in your life, and therefore enjoying the journey of your life, which includes your career, or whether you running a business, or it's just for personal growth. So um, today I've chosen a topic, and broadly I just wanted to address boundary management. So and I'm going to give you a broad overview, and then eventually I'm just going to then narrow it down to us as individuals. But just basically, boundary management, refers to the processes and strategies used to define, communicate, and maintain boundaries within various contexts. And what are these? Well, number one, personal boundaries. And these are defining limits with others to protect time, energy, and emotional well being. Also, within professional boundaries. That means establishing clear roles, responsibilities, and limits in the workplace. Then there's also organizational boundaries, defining the scope and limits of an organization's activities, authority, and responsibilities. And then, last but not least, project boundaries, defining project scope, timelines, and deliverables. Now, um, just to understand is that, well, okay, we can talk broadly about boundary management, but what is effective boundary management? Well, it involves um, number one, clear communication. Number two, defined expectations. Number three, respect for others' boundaries. Number four, active listening. Number five, assertiveness. Number six, flexibility and adaptability. And number seven, continuous monitoring and adjustment. So we'll expand on this a little bit later. Now, to sell it to you, I mean, why is it that we need boundary management? Well, the benefits are improved relationships, increased productivity, if you can imagine, enhanced clarity and focus, better time management, reduced conflicts, increased accountability, and improved overall well-being. Now, you know, with everything that we discuss, we always know there are some headwinds that you have to deal with. For example, challenges in boundary management are resistance to change, whether it's individually or within a team or within an organization. Conflicting priorities, expectations that are unclear, power imbalances, meaning how do you establish boundary with somebody who is your senior? Challenges in cultural or personal differences, and then challenges within the technological blurring of boundaries. For example, how do you maintain work life balance? And we've spoken about this topic in so many different ways. We talk about this hybrid way of working, both in a virtual sense as well as in an actual physical face to face sense. Virtually, I remember during COVID how difficult this was in the beginning to just establish these boundaries because nobody was seeing that you were working. So the anxiety to prove that you were working meant you were always connected, whether via Zoom or your phone or whatever. But even to an extent, to some sort of ridiculousness, is not even having a boundary when you go to the bathroom for a well-earned comfort break, because you take your cell phone with you in case anybody is looking for you. Um, and then, broadly speaking, and I promise we will really delve into this, and I want to have a conversation with Anaz around these things as well. So, those just broad strategies for effective boundary management. As you know, it starts off with setting clear goals and priorities. That focus that you take for outcomes has to start with you setting what you want to focus on, therefore, setting clear goals and priorities. Establish protocols and procedures, the way things need to be tackled. That best practice for getting work done. Using, and this is quite interesting, using I statements to communicate boundaries. Quite interesting. Personalizing boundary setting in that way. Practice active listening and empathy. Now, you've heard this now a couple of times, this active listening. We'll talk about it. Regularly review and adjust these boundaries. Of course, you set them and then you need to review them. Did you set your boundaries too tightly, or do you still need to tighten up on your boundaries? And then, we've spoken about resilience, and within building resilience, we spoke about developing a growth mindset. See every opportunity and don't judge it as good or bad, right or wrong, but see every situation as an opportunity for growth. And then seeking support and feedback, so very important. So as we go into this topic, I wanted us to kind of speak about personal boundary management, and then have the time to unpack these with Shanaz. In actual fact, Shanaz, if you want to stop me while I'm talking, you're most welcome.
Yeah, I you can go ahead. I mean, those were all important. I don't know, maybe when you start to unpack them, I can come in and comment.
Okay.
Yeah, but just firstly to say, the lack of boundaries is one of the key things which drive people or contribute to people coming to see counselors, psychologists, therapists, whoever. Definitely, a lack of boundaries and is one of the key issues. Absolutely.
Mhm. I can see how it is so relevant, and it just, that's why I thought about it, thinking, well, we've got all these great things that we're talking about, but how do you implement them? And so now I'm going to focus specifically on personal boundary management. I sometimes feel that, when you do it on behalf of a team and an organization and a project, it's as if that gives you the authority and power to establish and maintain those boundaries. But when it comes to the personal boundary setting, it's a little bit more challenging for a variety of reasons that we perhaps could unpack a little bit later. So, the types of personal boundaries that we want to talk about and we just want to cover is really starting with physical boundaries. Okay, what physical space do you want to maintain? What is appropriate in terms of how you want people to touch you or not to touch you? And then boundaries on intimacy. What are you comfortable with and what are you not comfortable with? And I think this is kind of important. I mean, I grew up in South Africa, whereby, which is quite interesting, and I think this has perhaps changed. And I don't know if COVID actually also has something to do with this, but I remember growing up, always standing in a queue. And I grew up in KwaZulu-Natal, Pietermaritzburg, specifically, and I remember queuing as a young person, and um, my mother sent me to go pay some bills, and I'm standing in a queue, and I always remember feeling a little crowded because people, when they were queuing, didn't allow you that space. So they'd be breathing down your neck. Now, of course, literally breathing down my neck because, I was a 10-year-old standing in queues paying the bills. And as I grew up and I started my career, I remember sitting in a stereotype reduction workshop, and that completely gives away my age because I'm not sure we actually have these things anymore. But anyway, and it was then described how different socioeconomic classes would behave while queuing. For example, the lower the socioeconomic class were, because of living standards, because people were living in a small house with lots of people in it, with the households going up to 10, sometimes on average, and then comfortable with living in a small space, but not a lot of room for personal space. Therefore, would exhibit while queuing, not to maintain that space. Standing behind somebody else, and then people
I
who
would
grow up.
disagree with that person. With that, I think that personal space is actually like that physical space. I don't think it's. I think that the. I mean, it's a good analogy, but in terms of or comparison, but I think that you'll actually find that the opposite could also be true unless you're going there saying that.
Well, this was the stereotype reduction that was being taught in the early
Oh,
90s.
at that time, yes. Okay, I forgot.
Yes,
Many
I'm not
years
talking
ago.
about currently. I'm talking about in the early. So I'm actually building towards a point. And and then secondly, and just seeing the different dynamics where the opposite was true, where you're living in a sort of more middle class type of a house, and you've got your own room, and you grow up with all that space, big garden, whatever. You tended to then observe space naturally. Now, whether or not that was true in the 90s, I certainly experienced some of that to some degree. But I must say, COVID comes around, and suddenly it was now enforced. You shall stand a meter and a half apart, and there's actually dots painted on the floor to allow you to do that. I have discovered since that, and obviously I lost consciousness around this, thinking I didn't pay attention to it until COVID and after COVID. So nowadays, when you're standing in a queue and we don't observe the COVID rules any longer, and you find that somebody's bumping up against you, and you look behind you. And there's no such thing as social economic class. In actual fact, that might have been true in the 90s in South Africa. And I've also discovered that when you travel, when you actually go overseas, that different countries have different rules where this is concerned. And it's quite amazingly that the stereotype that one is so hastily putting together does not necessarily generalize across countries as well. So, but I find as a person that I don't like somebody standing that close to me and touching me. It doesn't matter who they are, male or female or otherwise. I just don't. I want arm's length. I want breathing space around me, so able to actually turn around and assert that space, right? As that listen,
Can I
just.
ask you, is
Mhm.
would that be for someone you know as well, or only people you don't know or not well acquainted with?
You see, now that's great segmentation, is just unpacking it. I would say generally when I'm standing in a queue with strangers, I want that observed, that space. I don't know, and I'm only going to speak about myself. I don't know whether I would enjoy, in fact, I shouldn't say I don't know. I don't enjoy strangers, male or female or otherwise, standing that close to me and then resting themselves, hands, arms, elbows on my shoulders or in other particular way. I don't want to be touched by strangers, even as a man.
And then in terms of people that you know,
Well,
acquainted, well
um,
acquainted with,
yeah, I guess it's different because then the relationship, depending on the if I'm well acquainted with them and there is a certain form, there is like a familiarity with one another. I think it's when you actually more relaxed with somebody, but there's also, I think there's always unspoken rules in terms of these boundaries. So obviously, and it depends whether the relationship.
and that's where the complication sets in.
Yes. Well, it also
Absolutely.
depends whether the relationship is romantic or um, whether it's family, or whether it's friends or girlfriend or husband or wife. I think it kind of all comes down to this, and I and I use that as an example. You're asking me some good questions here, but I don't want to get stuck on this one. But I think that even in a close, intimate relationship, you still need to establish boundaries. And I think what I'm saying is that for each one of us as individuals, there are different things that makes us feel comfortable and other things that make us feel uncomfortable, and the ability to assert, to communicate, to express that level of discomfort, with others. And you'll see now there are also, so those are physical boundaries by way of having a conversation around music, but then there's also emotional boundaries. And what is meant by emotional boundaries, it starts with the self-management part. It's in terms of what is your level of self-mastery, in terms of managing your own emotions, and also providing emotional support. What support is adequate and what support is appropriate? So basically, once again, I think it also fits back into your questions around it depends on who you're with to a large degree. I don't know if you find that that would be true also for emotional boundaries, Shanaz.
Yes, but I tend to find that both physical and emotional, it really depends on the perceptions of the other person also. Because my view is that we are not that close. But others may have this idea we are that close, so they can do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I think that that's where I say that's where the complication comes in, is our perception of what is a close relationship and what is not a close relationship. And then the other person not necessarily having the same idea. And when the other people have different ideas about boundaries, that's when it becomes complicated. If I Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Yes, very much so. Very much so. So, and obviously, I mean, on the flip side, if you have a policy when you're in an organization, and as an employee, there are policies in place that would describe, what protocols are that need to be observed. So whether you have a perception or not, you just got to understand that. And whether it's relevant to you or not, that's not the issue. The issue is this is the rule, this is, or the regulation in that manner. It is a self-regulation, and so forth. And exactly that perception of closeness. I mean, that's a topic on its own. Okay, let me move ahead. Mental boundary as well, expressing thoughts and opinions and decision making. I like what a well-respected leader and pastor says, as he says that everyone has a right to have an opinion, but not everyone has the right to offer that opinion, to share that opinion. Which is interesting, right? Then there are digital boundaries, and I kind of alluded to it. What are the boundaries that you're going to observe as far as online presence is concerned, as far as social media is concerned, and the use of technology? Do you always need to be connected, but is there time to be disconnected? And I remember, I can't remember the exact topic, Shanaz, but it was about um, you talking about getting out in nature, and I think I don't know if it was stress management or whatever, but also to
Yeah,
disconnect
I think
from
it was
technology.
one of those topics because I remember I was just chatting to my sister yesterday about a church in the Netherlands that opens up, like they have a day in which anybody can come in and they just disconnect from social media and they do crafts and they do different things. So
Mm.
and other countries are developing those spaces as well.
Yeah, and it's so important to establish those digital boundaries, and then within the set time boundaries. I mean, how do you manage a time boundary? For example, personally, it's by scheduling your appointments, scheduling tasks, ensuring that the commitments that you're made, you've afforded the time, you've allocated a time budget for, and setting priorities in terms of where you want to start in your day, and what is the most important things to address within the allocated time. One thing, we talk about, in this case, time boundaries, but time waits for no person. The clock is going to tick. um, and and basically the Earth spins on its own axis, and it travels around, um, and therefore you have sunset and you have sunrise, and all within this time frame. That is it. That we have 24 hours a day. I don't think certain people have more than no. I know certain people don't have more than others. When you have the perception that they get more done, sometimes you think they have more hours in the day. No, everybody gets the same allocation. So, how do you manage your time boundaries, for example? So, and like with everything else, Shanaz, we've noticed this a lot is now, we run out of time, but maybe, we can continue this conversation in the series. But anyway, let me see if I can get through some of this. As how do you set healthy boundaries? Number one is identify your own limits, right? And I've spoken about this. Recognize what you're comfortable with and what you're not. Communicate clearly by using I statements to express your boundaries. Set consequences, interesting enough. Now, what happens when somebody crosses your boundaries? So you need to think about that. Establish what that means. Okay, so I have my boundaries, but if somebody crosses these boundaries, what am I going to do? Right? So set consequences to anybody overstepping your boundaries. And then prioritizing self care. Make time for activities that nourish your mind, your body, and your soul. And then, this to me is primarily the most important thing. From in my own opinion, is that you got to practice assertiveness. All right, and what this means is that you got to stand up for yourself without aggression or passivity. You can't think that people must just be so intuitive that they must just know what your boundaries are. Like Shanaz was saying earlier on, is that what is my perception of comfort? What is my perception of closeness, for example? And because those things, if they're allowed just to manifest on their own, we either feel very affronted by how people are crossing our boundaries. So we behave in different ways, of course. And if we don't practice assertiveness, we either wait until we've had enough, and then we overly aggressive actively, or we passively aggressive, or we just disengage from people and avoid them. I can go on and on about that, but how, when you have established your boundaries, you've now communicated them, and you assess and you ensure that you review your boundaries, and also what the consequences are when your boundaries are crossed, is you need to maintain your boundaries. If you say you've now plucked up the courage to establish these things, is you've got to be consistent, right? As for example, I can't have boundaries for Shanaz and boundaries for Julia and Julia sees, oh, but how come he allows that with Shanaz, but he doesn't allow that for me? I mean, where is the consistency as far as that is concerned? So that is number one, is these are my boundaries, and I apply them consistently with everyone, but I also apply my boundaries consistently. I'm not erratic. It's not like one day I wake up a certain way, the next day I wake up another, and so people are a little unsure around you, right? But you got to be firm, albeit be respectful, right? Once again, we are being encouraged not to be aggressive or passive aggressive, and use nonverbal cues. Body language and tone of voice can convey boundaries. And I must say, body language also be with your body language, which were nonverbal cues. Be firm but respectful. So it's the same thing. Don't be aggressive or passive aggressive in your body language. Don't smack somebody's hand or elbow them in the ribs or whatever the case might be. Um, then set boundaries proactively. Okay, so that means you're establishing boundaries before they are needed, before somebody crosses them, and then it's maybe too late to establish or to maintain a relationship even. And then what I said earlier on, reviewing and adjusting, is regularly assess and adjust boundaries as needed. Now, here's some challenges from a personal boundary space. Is um, don't make me laugh, Shanas. Clapping someone indeed. Sorry about that. But I think number one is the reason we're not assertive is that we want to please people. We are we present as people pleasers, so we don't establish boundaries. We have a fear of rejection or abandonment. We have such a difficulty saying no. And I think we've had a topic or two where we discussed the ability to say no, overcommitting to things, because, and I think at the heart of overcommitting in any context is you want to please people. And then sometimes, or on most occasions, it could also be a lack of self-awareness. What is the benefits of maintaining healthy personal boundaries? Well, it's improved self-esteem, it's increased confidence, it's you have better relationships because people know where they stand with you. There's reduced stress and anxiety, and then you have enhanced emotional regulation, right? And then I'm going to just end off with this: five strategies for overcoming boundaries challenges. Now, we don't have time to unpack these today, but just to let you know that number one is that you need to practice self compassion. Number two, you need to develop assertiveness skills. And I think maybe we must have a topic on each one of these. We need to seek support from others in overcoming boundary challenges. We need to engage in self reflection, number four. And then lastly, set realistic expectations. And herewith, I end my presentation, Shanas, with a minute to spare.
Okay, what shall I say in that minute? That it's so essential, and I think that it really in the workspace. I was thinking particularly in the workspace, and in the context. I mean, we all work in complex contexts, so it's really important because it also relates to your mental well-being, but also achieving your career goals. You know, the company's goals, etc. And I just think, in terms of, we know of so many organizations where the boundaries hadn't been set or the lines had been blurred, and it really affects productivity, and the health, I think, of the organization, but also the individuals involved.
Hmm. Yeah, look, it's a topic to be expanded. Hint, hint, hint. And
Okay, I catch the
yeah,
hint.
and I mean, look.
I catch the hint.
Okay, but thank you, Shanaz. Thank you, Julia, and to everyone who actually is listening to this podcast. We talk about boundary management a lot, and we it's always a question of yes, I ought to and I should. And I say, take the first few steps towards managing the boundaries. And I want to end up and really, what makes you feel comfortable, what does not make you feel comfortable, and it is your right to assert yourself in terms of this. So thank you very much for listening, and have a wonderful week until we chat again next week. Thank you, Shanas. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.